Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. This is part 3 of our ACME deep dive. Part 1, we looked at PKI basics, what a certificate is, and a little bit about how the math works between a public and private key pair. Second week, we looked at a little bit more of the ACME protocol itself, how the validations actually work, whether you're doing it through HTTP or through DNS. This week is the big one. We're looking at implementation. I mentioned before that I have 3 tools that I typically use. I'm going to mention all of them, and I'm going to cover where I use them, generally speaking, but I'm not going to go into depth on all 3 of them. I'm going to go into depth on one of them. And from what we've discussed previously and having a look at how we go on to configure the one that we're going to go in depth on, it should give you a pretty solid foundation for working with the other 2. So what are these tools? Let's get that out of the way. The tools that I have preferentially used are Dehydrated, acme.sh, and Win-ACME. It had a previous name previously, but Win-ACME is what it's got right now. Dehydrated is a shell script. It's written in Bash shell script specifically, which means that this is very much meant for Linux systems. Dehydrated has the capability to work with a bunch of different usage scenarios. The thing that I typically use it for is where I just need it to work with a web server, specifically. Dehydrated has a way of being able to accept the token validation values and just put them in the file system as the web server serves that out. So it's very simple to use in that case. If you're going to use it for other challenges, such as DNS, then you need to write a hook script or use a hook script that somebody else has written that can do the interfacing for you. And that tends to get a little more complicated. So I use it for what it's best at. I just need a simple shell script that will interface with a web server. Boom, Dehydrated, done and dusted. It's easy. Another tool I use is acme.sh. Acme.sh is what I will use on the Linux side of things, or BSD. It comes built into OpenSense, for example, so it's an excellent choice to use there. But in Linux, or a Nix environment, acme.sh is what I'll use if I need something a little more complex, like working with DNS validations. And I'll use this because it has a lot of DNS providers built in, or it has support for those providers already built in. So I don't have to write or find the correct extension to do that. It's already there. I will say something that always trips me up with using acme.sh, however, is that if you're using just the program itself, it defaults to using 0 SSL as the certificate authority. This is not a problem. I just have the desire to use a consistent certificate authority of Let's Encrypt, which is what I use on everything. So when I use acme.sh, I want it to use the same thing. You can do that, it's just not the default, and I always forget that, and I always wind up with a certificate from 0 SSL and go, oh, that's not what I wanted. Now I have to go fix this. But that's my only gripe, and it's a minor one. It's really, really minor. Win-ACME is the one that we're going to go in depth on, because that is what I use on Windows servers exclusively. And that's the one where I expect a lot of people will find it quite useful, at least in the Windows world. In the Linux world, you've already got other tools and lots of tools that can be used to work with ACME certificates. And usually If you're not somebody who comes to me telling me there's no such thing as an Acme account, usually people who are using Linux are a little bit more up to speed on the details of what they're doing. But I'm generalizing. So we're going to go into depth on the Windows side of things, and I'm going to show you how to get Win-ACME, what you need to use Win-ACME, how to configure Win-ACME both for HTTP validations and for DNS validations, and discuss some of the things that you can do with it. So let's get started. All right then, so here we are on a wonderful little server. This is actually one of my development servers that I use for various reasons. And it already has Win-ACME set up on it. But that's not the point of this particular video. So let's start by taking a look at the Win-ACME website, win-acme.com. Very simple. It even says it's simple right there. It's got a lot of features. It's got some sponsors. Most of what you're going to be looking for, if you need help with figuring out various parts of it, is going to be under manual and reference. There's useful bits of information on both of those pages, so I recommend that you give both of them a thorough read if you want to do something that is slightly more out of the ordinary than what we're going to go through today. If you go to download, there's a recommended version, there's a larger download with plugin support, there's other builds, release notes, older versions. I will usually just go to release notes because that actually takes us to the GitHub page for the project. And under assets, if you show all, you'll notice that in addition to the various versions of Win-ACME itself, there's also a lot of plugins for various stores, validations. These are all DNS validation plugins. This is what is really useful to me in the Windows world, is I can grab a plugin for GoDaddy DNS, let's say, and it'll just integrate cleanly. Now, what are the difference between these particular releases? Most of the time I'm going to get an x64 release. If I want web server support only, I'll go for the trimmed version. If I need something that can take one of these plugins and work with that, I'll go for the pluggable version. You'll notice there is a difference between these two. The only difference there is that this one has the capability to automatically detect and extend itself with plugins. So in that case, I would use the pluggable version. But know that you can use the trimmed version if you're just looking to get web server support. This is what it looks like when you open the zip file. There's a script directory, which has a bunch of scripts that are already provided for your use. Your mileage may vary. I never use any of these. If I need a script, and we'll cover that in a little bit, I'll generally speaking write it myself. There's a default settings file, there's a version, there's the application itself. This all looks fine. That being said, I'll generally install this by just copying these files into C program files Win-ACME. And in this case, this particular version, if we take a look at the version, this is actually an older version, 2.1.20. Upgrading this is really, really simple, because all you really need to do is copy the files out of this zip and copy it over top of what you've already got in there. I'm not going to do that right this second because I'd want to back up the directory and review settings and a bunch of other stuff that is not necessarily great content, because it's pretty tedious. But when you extract the files into your Win-ACME folder, the easiest thing to do is to get your settings _ default, copy it to settings.json just on its own. There's a lot of initial settings in here that you can set up. and then I'll just typically drag it into Notepad. If you're using a current version of Notepad, it will handle whatever line endings it has, and you'll just be able to get started without having to do any line ending conversions. Most of this is stuff that you don't need to touch. If you want to learn more about it, the information is there in the reference on the Win-ACME website. Most of the things I will change will be for the scheduled task. The start boundary by default is at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. is not necessarily a great time to be renewing certificates, I find, if only because there's going to be a momentary disruption to services when the certificate renews. It'll be very minor, but if that's going to happen, I want that to happen sometime in the morning. So I'll usually do 2 a.m. Random delay is it may delay at random up to 4 hours. This creates a window so that we don't have everybody hitting the certificate servers at the top of an hour, for example. So with my start boundary at 2 in the morning, I know it's going to fire a renewal somewhere between 2 and 6 o'clock in the morning, which is still okay for what I'm doing. Notification, you can set this up to send notification emails if something goes wrong. I highly recommend it. This is my development server, so I don't actually have that set up here, but this is where you can set up reference to a local mail server, or you can have it send directly into Office 365 or another service using SMTP Relay. Hey, what do you know? I did a video on that already. Cool. And there's a bunch of settings that you can use to configure that. Security. This, as far as I recall, is not 2048 by default. I set it down to 2048 because that is considered solid enough for an SSL certificate at the current time. And I'll set the ECC curve. I'm pretty sure this is the 384-bit curve by default, and I set that down to 256. Again, because that's considered solid security at this point, and I don't need anything more. Private key exportable, if you want to be able to export a certificate from the server, you'll want to set that to true. I generally don't, because if I need the certificate somewhere else, I can just set this up on the other server and run it from there and get a new certificate issued. It's no biggie. It's no biggie whatsoever. The rest of this validation, if you want, when you're doing DNS validation, it will use these servers to look up and make sure that the record is there. Newer versions have this set to system DNS, whatever this server has its local DNS server set up to. I usually set that to something public, just to make sure that we're referencing public records and not something that's been cached internally, because the CA is not going to have access to that internal cache. The rest of this I will pretty much leave as is. Once you have your settings set up with that, then you can open a command prompt. I recommend running it as administrator and go to your directory, and you just run the executable. You can see that right now I'm using the trimmed version in here. The scheduled task looks healthy. I'll never actually create a certificate using default settings because it makes some assumptions that I prefer to replace with my own choices. So I will go through the full options version, and that's also better for this video so that you can see all the options that are available. You can get your domain names from reading bindings in IIS. I don't because I want to manually specify that. So I'll do manual input. All right. Here's a test domain that I already set up for a different project. Okay. Friendly name. This is how it will display the certificate in Windows. If you're looking at it through the certificates console or something else, this is not necessary to adjust. So here I'll just typically hit enter to accept it. There we go. And then it wants to say, okay, how are you going to do this verification? And you can see it's actually listing HTTP 01 or DNS 01 or TLS Alpin 01. These are your available validation methods. Because this is the trimmed version, we don't have the ability to actually accept plugins. So for this, I would usually use option number 2, serve verification files from memory. This will harmoniously coexist with IIS, so that if you already have a web server running, Win-ACME will just kind of sidle into place with that and serve the verification files itself without you having to make any configuration changes to your web server, which is really nice and convenient. It's going to ask if we want an elliptic curve certificate or an RSA certificate. I'll generally go with elliptic curve. The only thing I know of that really requires an RSA key is Exchange and some older firewall software that hasn't been updated to anything new. Where do you want to store it? Well, there is such a thing as an IIS central certificate store. There you can save it to a PEM file, which is a very typical format for Apache, Nginx, and some other Linux uses. A PFX archive is more of the Windows style of file. Or you can just install it into the Windows Certificate Store, which is usually good enough for what we want to do. And where do you want to store it? Do you want to store it in web hosting, which is a dedicated store for your web server? Or you can put it in My, which is the general computer store. There are some applications, like it's telling you, Exchange, remote desktop services, that will not actually look at any other certificate store other than My. So it's something that you need to pay attention to and make sure you choose the correct store for what you're doing. In this case, I'll put it into My. You can store it in multiple places. So once you've chosen one store, you can choose another. I'm going to say no additional store steps just because I don't need anything else right now. Once it's been stored, how do you want to install it? You can install it directly into IIS by using this create or update bindings. You can start an external script or program. This is what I would use if I want to take that certificate and I have to do something specific with it. For example, with Exchange, I might have a script that runs enable Exchange certificate so that it adds the correct services to it through PowerShell. And you can do multiple installation steps. So for example, if I do this, okay, I can put this on any of these particular websites. All right. I'll put that there. And I could also start an external script or program. This will be less useful for me because I don't actually have a script set up. But the path to the script file, you could do something as simple as scripts and then make it script.ps1. Or you could do a .cmd or a .bat or whatever else you want. It's smart enough to tell me that doesn't actually exist. Yeah, my mistake. I'm sorry. But when you have a suitable script that you want to run, it will also ask you if there are any arguments that you want to supply. Arguments are variables that you can replace at runtime. For example, one of the common arguments I will often use is thumbprint. This is replaced by the thumbprint of the certificate that you're running. Again, if I'm using a script, for example, to enable Exchange services, it wants the thumbprint of the certificate that it's enabling. So that option is very useful there. In this case, though, I can't give it a 0, so I'll give it the script name of something else. I'll do this import Exchange just for fun. Am I going to do import Exchange? Yeah, why not? I don't have Exchange on this server, so it'll probably throw a massive error. But hey, it's something that we get to see. My mistake. It says parameters, not arguments. But these are arguments to the script. So I'll just do thumbprint, because that's what I would normally do. Cool. No additional installation steps, but you could chain multiple scripts to it if you wanted. At this point, it's going to try and authorize it using our HTTP 01 validation. The result is valid. Cool. Then it's going to download the certificate. It's going to install it to the certificate store. Great. It's updated. It knows that this is an FTP site. Okay, fine. And then for the script, yeah, I know this was not set up to be the way it should be, so we've got a bunch of errors. But okay, cool. We've created the certificate, and we've gone ahead and requested it via HTTP 01, and we're good. Cool. All right. Well, now I'm going to quit that, clear the screen, and what I'm actually going to do now is store all of this in a wonderful little new old folder. Yeah, go ahead, move all of it. Move all of it. Keep moving all of it. You know what, I should just do this for all current items. There we go. All right. Then let's go and open up our zip file again. And I'll show you, because this is the pluggable version, I'll show you how we do this with GoDaddy as an example of using a plugin. Copy the new stuff in. Just like I said before, we'll want to actually copy this to settings.json, like so. And I'll pop that open, shove it over here. See, random, the start boundary is 9 a.m., not really what I want. DNS servers are system, and I'm going to, for this particular example, just set that to your standard Google public DNS. RSA key bits is 2048. The curve I want is 256. The options clearly have changed a little bit between the versions, but while they look a little different, the intent is still the same. So you can always figure that out. Okay, that's what I want. Yes, I want you to save it as settings.json. Yes, I want to replace it. But I don't have the permissions to do so because I didn't open this with admin rights. This is one of those things that occasionally you need to futz with as a system administrator. You have to open it with admin rights, and then you can't drag it because you can't drag files from a non-elevated session to an elevated session. Okay, fine. Open settings, there we go. Set that to 2048 again. Set that back to 256. Set this to 8.8.8.8. Wonderful. And then we'll also want the correct plugin, GoDaddy. Wonderful. The plugin comes as a pair of DLL files, and all you need to do is copy these into the same folder as where you have your version of Win-ACME set up, which incidentally, WACS stands for Windows Acme Client Simple. Cool. Too many posts were made to a semaphore. That's fascinating. I've never seen that before. But it works. Cool. Unblocking these is more of a beneficial thing than a requirement, but it helps to make sure that everything is taken care of the way it should be. So then if we go back here and run our new version, all right. This is now the pluggable release. Okay, cool. Scheduled task start time mismatch because it doesn't match what we configured in settings previously. It exists but does not look healthy. Okay, fine. We're going to leave that at the moment because, again, we're just doing this as a demonstration. I'm going to do manual input again. And the host this time is going to be something like test2 with my test domain. There we go. Yeah, that's fine. You can do, in newer versions, separate certificates for each domain or each subdomain. You can do separate certificates for each IIS site. I will typically do a single certificate per order because that works for me. And you can see that we've got a new verification method for creating verification records in GoDaddy DNS, which is being provided by our plugin. Cool, let's do that. All right, now it's asking you for a GoDaddy API key. Where do you go to get this? Well, if you go to developer.godaddy.com/keys for this API keys section, you'll get API key management. There are two environments available here. OTE is the online test environment. This is a good thing to use if you're just testing API use, but you won't be able to get any live DNS records and therefore will not be able to request any certificates with it. Production is what you need when you're actually ready to do this for realsies. And you can see I've got a couple here. I've got a test one in the online test environment, and I've got the regular one in production. We're going to go through and create a new API key. Alrighty. We've got a name here. I'm just going to call this a test ACME key. And I'm going to make it in production. This is very important. You can see the key. In future, you cannot see the secret. This is the one and only time it will be shown. If you are not saving it, and you'll see an option as we go to save it in the vault for reuse, if you do not save this somewhere else, you will never be able to get it again. So, very important that you save it, if necessary, in a place where you can get at it. I'm just going to paste this into the console. There we go. I'm not going to save it to the vault because we're just doing this as a demonstration. Then you get the secret. All right. Again, I'm going to type this in. There we are. And I'm not going to save it to the vault. I am going to choose an elliptic certificate again. I'm going to save this particular certificate to the Windows Certificate Store. I'm going to put this one in the web hosting store just because. No additional store steps. And this time I'm not even going to bother installing it anywhere because, again, we're just doing a demo. All right, so now it's going to authorize this using DNS01 validation. It's going to create the record. These are the validators. The validators that it's working with did not find any of the text records because DNS sometimes takes a little bit of time to propagate. But it will retry in 30 seconds. And typically it does not take more than 1 or 2 retries for this to actually go through. There's your preliminary validation succeeded. Authorized successfully. And then it deletes the record immediately thereafter. It's exactly what we want to see. Downloads the certificate, stores it. There was nothing to install, so that's done. And it's still prompting us, do you want to change your scheduled task? No, I don't. Leave the settings as they are. Cool. All right. And it's just like that, it's done. The renewals are saved. They're all ready to go, and they'll just run via the scheduled task every however often you've defined it, at the time that you've defined it. And when you go here, you hit got it, Cool. And you see the key is saved there, but there's no way to access the secret ever again. The only thing you can do is edit the key name, and that's it. Or in this case, delete it entirely. There it is. So that is Win-ACME, and then you can just hit Q to quit, and you're all done. Wasn't that simple? Very simple indeed. But there's actually one other thing I want to show you. If we go back here and go back to the main Win-ACME website, if you hit support, the person who creates Win-ACME has a Patreon. He's from the Netherlands, and I have no idea how to pronounce this, so I'm not going to try because I don't want to offend anybody. But there is a very low cost to supporting them, and I do recommend supporting it because it's a fabulous application and it works very well. If you're using it in a commercial environment, you can also do full sponsorship on a monthly basis, which has the benefits listed. But if you're just using this on a personal basis or on a test basis or whatever, even, $2, $3, $7.50 a month, that's practically the same price as a coffee at Starbucks, for crying out loud. It's not a big ask. And every little bit helps. It's something that I would recommend because this is a fabulously valuable application. To me, anyway. But that's just my editorial opinion. And there you have it. We have gone through most, if not all, most, of how I would use Win-ACME in most cases. And for the most part, I expect that this will hold you in good stead. So that wraps up our Acme deep dive. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll address anything that comes up in next week's freeform, because why not? So for now, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door net admin. We'll see you next time.